I never thought the sound of my own front door opening would fill me with such terror. 6 months. 6 months I spent fighting for every breath in that cold hospital bed, tubes running through my body like roots, anchoring me to machines that beeped and hummed through endless nights. 6 months of wondering if I would ever see home again, if I would ever feel the warmth of my own kitchen, smell the lavender I planted by the window, touch the worn armrest of the chair where I used to read to my grandson. But nothing, absolutely nothing could have prepared me for what waited for me on the other side of that door. The door I had walked through thousands of times, carrying groceries, welcoming grandchildren, stepping out to water the garden my late husband and I planted together 40 years ago. This time, when I crossed that threshold, I was not coming home. I was entering a nightmare I could never have imagined, one that would shatter every memory I had ever held sacred in this house. You know that feeling when you wake up and for just a moment you forget where you are, and then reality crashes back and you remember everything all at once? That is what it felt like stepping into my own living room, except the reality that crashed into me was not one I recognized. My son stood there in the entryway, not rushing forward to embrace me, not offering to help me with the small bag the hospital had given me for my belongings. He stood there with his arms crossed, his face wearing an expression I had never seen before, cold and distant, like I was a stranger who had wandered into his home uninvited. This is the boy I carried for 9 months, the child I rocked through countless nights of fever and nightmares, the young man I worked 3 jobs to put through college because his father had passed, and I refused to let him sacrifice his dreams. This is the son I nearly died giving birth to, the son for whom I gave up my own career, my own youth, every ounce of strength I had in my body. And he looked at me like I was nothing. The house smelled different. Everything looked the same but felt wrong, like walking through a familiar place in a dream where nothing quite makes sense. My photographs were still on the mantel, the ones of my husband in his military uniform, the ones of my son as a baby, the family portraits we took every Christmas without fail. But they felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else's life, someone else's memories. I took a step forward, my legs still weak from months of bed rest, my hands trembling as I reached out to steady myself on the wall I had painted myself 20 years ago. A soft cream color my husband said reminded him of the beaches where we spent our honeymoon. My son did not move to help me. He watched me struggle, watched me shuffle forward like an old woman, which I suppose I was, though I had never felt it quite so deeply until that moment. Then he spoke, and his words cut through me sharper than any scalpel the surgeons had used during my time in intensive care. You sleep in the maid's room now. 6 words. That is all it took to erase 63 years of my life in this house. That is all it took to reduce me from mother to servant, from owner to intruder, from the woman who built this home with her bare hands and her husband's love to something less than human. I stood there in the hallway, my mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, trying to form words that would not come, trying to understand what I was hearing, trying to make sense of how the universe could twist so cruelly that the child I loved more than my own life could speak to me this way. He held out a mop, an actual mop, the blue-handled one I kept in the utility closet, the one I had used to clean these floors for decades while he played with his toys, while he did homework at the kitchen table, while he brought girlfriends home and I pretended not to notice them sneaking kisses in the hallway. He held it out to me like it was a gift, like he was doing me some kind of favor, and his eyes, those brown eyes that used to look up at me with such love and trust, were empty now, hollow, showing me nothing of the boy I raised and everything of a stranger I did not know. The maid's room. We did not even have a maid. We never could afford one. That little room off the kitchen was where I used to sew, where I made his Halloween costumes by hand, where I altered his school uniforms to save money, where I sat late into the night creating Christmas presents when we could not afford store-bought gifts. That room held my sewing machine that my mother gave me, the one she used to make my wedding dress, the one I used to make his baby clothes, to mend his father's work shirts, to create something from nothing year after year after year. And now he was telling me that was where I belonged, not in the master bedroom where I had slept beside my husband for 30 years until cancer took him, not in the guest room with the comfortable bed and the window that caught the morning sun, in the maid's room, on the narrow cot I kept there for when I worked late into the night and did not want to wake my husband by climbing into bed at 2 in the morning. I want to tell you that I found my voice in that moment. I want to tell you that I stood tall and demanded to know what madness had possessed my son, what devil had crawled into his heart during the 6 months I fought for my life. But the truth is, I just stood there, shaking, my whole body trembling with exhaustion and shock and a grief so profound it made my knees buckle. The nurses had warned me that recovery would be hard. They told me I would need help, that I should not be alone, that someone would need to assist me with basic tasks while I regained my strength. I thought that someone would be my son. I thought he would be there to help me walk, to remind me to take my medications, to make sure I ate enough, to hold my hand through the nightmares that still plagued me from my time in intensive care. I thought wrong. He gestured toward the back of the house with the mop, a casual flick of his wrist like he was directing a servant, and I saw it then, really saw it for the first time. He was not alone. There was a woman standing in my kitchen, a woman I had never seen before, wearing an apron I recognized because I had bought it myself, using my dishes, standing at my stove. She looked at me without sympathy, without kindness, with nothing but cold assessment, like she was measuring me for a coffin and finding me already dead. She was young, maybe 30, with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails. Everything about her screaming money and privilege. Everything about her completely wrong in my simple working-class kitchen. My son walked over to her, put his arm around her waist with a familiarity that spoke of months, maybe years, definitely longer than the 6 months I had been gone. She leaned into him, smiled up at him with a possessiveness that made my stomach turn, and I understood then with horrible clarity. This was not his girlfriend. This was not some new relationship. This was his wife. He had gotten married while I was dying. He had gotten married and never told me, never invited me, never even mentioned her name during his brief visits to my hospital room. Visits that became less and less frequent as the months wore on. Visits where he barely looked at me, barely spoke, barely acknowledged that I was his mother lying there fighting for every breath. If you are watching this and you have ever felt invisible in your own life, if you have ever felt discarded by the people you loved most in this world, if you have ever wondered how someone you gave everything to could treat you like nothing, I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to know you are not alone in this pain. Down in the comments, I want you to type these words: I am still here and I matter. Just those 6 words. Type them for yourself. Type them for me. Type them for every person watching this who has felt thrown away like garbage by their own children. Because when you type those words, when you put them out into the world, you are not just validating your own experience. You are reaching across the darkness to touch someone else who feels exactly what you feel right now. You are building a bridge of understanding between broken hearts. You are telling the universe that we will not disappear quietly, that we will not let them erase us, that we are still here and we still matter. So please, right now, go to the comments and type, I am still here and I matter. Let us fill this space with our voices, with our presence, with the undeniable truth that we exist and we deserve better than this. The woman in my kitchen, my son's secret wife, spoke then, and her voice was sugar-sweet poison, the kind of tone you use with small children or very stupid people. She told me the rules. I would clean the house every day. I would do the laundry. I would prepare the meals but eat separately, after they had finished, eating whatever they left behind. I would not use the main bathroom. I would not sit in the living room. I would not touch any of their things. I would make myself scarce when they had guests. I would earn my keep, or I would have to leave. And where would I go? She asked with a smile that never reached her eyes. Where would an old sick woman with no money and no family go? I wanted to scream that this was my house. I wanted to pull out the deed with my name on it, the mortgage papers I had paid off year after year with money I earned cleaning other people's houses, waiting tables, working overnight shifts at the factory. I wanted to remind my son that every brick of this house, every board, every nail, every inch of this property was bought with my sweat and my sacrifice. But I could not find the words. My mind was foggy from months of medication, from trauma, from the simple inability to process what was happening. So I took the mop. I took it with my trembling hands and I nodded like the obedient servant they expected me to be, and I shuffled toward the back of the house, toward my sewing room that was now my prison cell, toward the narrow cot that was now my bed, toward a life I could not comprehend. The maid's room was exactly as I had left it 6 months ago, except it was not. My sewing machine was gone. The shelves where I kept my fabrics and threads and patterns were empty. The photographs I had hung on the walls, pictures of my son at every age, were taken down, leaving pale rectangles on the faded wallpaper. In their place was nothing, Just bare walls and that narrow cot with sheets that smelled musty, like they had not been washed in months. There was a small dresser, 3 drawers, and when I opened them I found they were empty except for the bottom one, which held some of my clothes. Not all of them, just a random selection, my oldest things, the worn-out nightgowns and faded house dresses I should have thrown away years ago but kept out of habit and frugality. I sat down on that cot and I felt something break inside me. Something fundamental and irreparable. This was not grief. Grief is what I felt when my husband died. A clean pain that hurt but made sense. A natural part of life's cycle. This was something else. Something darker and more confusing. A betrayal so deep it reached into my very identity and shook everything I thought I knew about love and family and the world itself. I had given this boy everything. Everything. I gave up my youth for him. I gave up my dreams. I worked myself to exhaustion year after year to give him opportunities I never had. I went without so he could have. I stayed up nights nursing him through sickness. I fought with teachers who did not see his potential. I sacrificed relationships, friendships, my own health, all of it, every single piece of myself. I laid at his feet like offerings to a God I thought would love me back. The first night in that room, I did not sleep. I lay on that cot staring at the ceiling, listening to sounds from the rest of the house, my house, the house that no longer felt like mine. I heard them laughing in the living room. I heard the television playing, the same television I bought with my tax refund 3 years ago. I heard glasses clinking, music playing softly, the sounds of people enjoying an evening at home, comfortable and relaxed, while I lay in the dark wondering how my life had become unrecognizable. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke to bright sunlight streaming through the small window and the sound of my son's voice calling from the kitchen, sharp and impatient, telling me my breakfast was getting cold and I needed to clean up the kitchen before I ate. I got up, my body screaming in protest, every muscle stiff and aching from the uncomfortable cot and from months of illness I was still recovering from. I shuffled to the kitchen and found a plate on the counter, far from the dining table where they sat, finishing their elaborate breakfast of fresh fruit and pastries and coffee that smelled expensive. My plate held 2 pieces of cold toast and a hard-boiled egg. That was it. No butter, no jam, no coffee. Just toast and an egg, sitting on the counter like food you would put out for a stray dog you tolerated but did not really want around. I ate standing up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the toast, and then I cleaned the kitchen while they watched television in the other room, their laughter drifting in to mock me as I scrubbed the dishes and wiped the counters and swept the floor. My body was not ready for this. The doctors had given me strict instructions about rest, about not overdoing it, about letting myself heal, but there was no rest here. There was only work and exhaustion and the constant ache of knowing I was invisible in my own home. The days blurred together into a nightmare routine. I woke early, before them, and prepared their breakfast. I cleaned the house while they slept late or went out or entertained friends who never knew I existed. I did their laundry, folding his shirts the way I had taught him to fold them when he was 12, ironing her dresses with the same iron I used to press his father's uniform. I cooked elaborate meals I was not allowed to share, eating scraps and leftovers standing in the kitchen after they had finished, after they had retired to the living room or the bedroom, dismissing me with a wave, like I was nothing more than the furniture. My son barely looked at me. When he did speak to me, it was to criticize, to point out something I had missed while cleaning, to tell me I was too slow, too loud, too visible. He never called me mom. He never called me anything, really, just spoke at me like I was a particularly disappointing employee he was stuck with and could not fire. And her, his wife, whose name I learned was Melissa, she was worse in some ways because she pretended to be kind. She would smile at me with that sugar-sweet voice and tell me I was doing such a good job, that she appreciated my hard work, all while handing me more tasks, more responsibilities, more ways to break myself down into nothing. I started to forget things, not big things at first, just little details. I would walk into a room and forget why I was there. I would start a task and lose track of what I was doing halfway through. I thought it was exhaustion, thought it was the trauma of everything that had happened, thought it was my body and mind trying to protect me from a reality too painful to bear. But it got worse. I would forget conversations from an hour ago. I would ask the same questions repeatedly. I would look at familiar objects and not remember their names, not remember what they were for, reaching for a spoon and calling it a fork, searching for the word for refrigerator and coming up empty, my mind blank and frightening. Melissa noticed first. She watched me struggle to remember where I had put the cleaning supplies, watched me stand in the middle of the kitchen looking lost and confused, and instead of concern, I saw calculation in her eyes. She told my son, whispered to him when she thought I could not hear, told him I was getting worse, told him I was becoming a liability, told him maybe it was time to think about other arrangements. And my son, my beautiful boy who I used to rock to sleep singing lullabies my mother sang to me, he nodded, he agreed. He looked at me like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be helped. The memory loss terrified me more than anything else, more than the exhaustion, more than the isolation, more than the constant hunger from never getting enough to eat, because I could feel myself slipping away, feel my own mind becoming unreliable, feel the foundation of who I was crumbling beneath me. I would have moments of clarity where I remembered everything, where I saw my situation with horrible precision, and then I would have moments where nothing made sense, where I could not remember how I got here, why I was cleaning someone's house, who these people were, who seemed to know me but felt like strangers. One morning I woke up and could not remember where I was. I looked around the small room with growing panic, not recognizing anything, not understanding why I was on this uncomfortable cot instead of in my own bed. I got up and wandered into the kitchen, and Melissa was there making coffee, and I asked her, polite and confused, if she knew where my son was, if she knew when he was coming to pick me up. She stared at me for a long moment, and then she smiled, that terrible smile, and she told me my son was right upstairs, that this was his house, that I lived here now, and I should get started on my chores. I felt reality shift, felt memory crash back into place, felt the weight of my situation settle over me again like a heavy blanket I could not throw off. But the moment of confusion, of not knowing, had revealed something to her. She saw weakness, she saw opportunity, and she started to use it against me, started to gaslight me, started to tell me I was remembering things wrong, that I was confused, that I was getting sicker and would need to go somewhere soon, somewhere they could take care of me properly, somewhere far away from this house that was mine, but felt like theirs. I tried to hold on. I tried so hard to stay present, to remember, to not let myself slip into the fog that seemed to be creeping over my mind more and more each day. I created little tricks to help myself remember. I wrote notes and hid them in my room, reminders of who I was, of what had happened, of the truth of my situation. I repeated important facts to myself like mantras. This is my house. I bought this house. My name is on the deed. This is my son. I raised him. I loved him. He is doing this to me. These are facts. These are true. Remember them. But facts became slippery things in that house. Truth became negotiable. Reality itself seemed to warp and bend around their cruelty until I could not trust my own mind anymore. Was I sick before I came here? Or did this place make me sick? Did I really almost die in the hospital? Or was that a dream? Was my husband real? Or did I imagine him? The questions spiraled, and I could not hold on to the answers, could not grasp them firmly enough to keep them from slipping away like water through my fingers. Months passed, I think, though time became meaningless in that room, in that routine of work and exhaustion and increasing confusion. My body grew weaker despite the constant labor, or maybe because of it, my muscles wasting away from inadequate food and too much stress. My hands developed a tremor that never stopped. My back ached constantly from sleeping on that terrible cot and from bending over to clean their floors. My mind grew cloudier, the fog thicker, the moments of clarity fewer and farther between. Then one day, I think it was a Tuesday, but I could not be sure, could not hold on to details like days of the week anymore. Melissa sat me down at the kitchen table, the first time I had been allowed to sit there in months. She had papers in her hand, official-looking documents with lots of words I could not focus on, could not make sense of through the haze in my mind. She spoke softly, kindly, using that voice that made my skin crawl because I knew by then it meant nothing good. She told me she had found a place for me, a nice place, she said, where they could take care of me properly, where I would not have to work so hard, where I could rest and be around people who understood my condition. I tried to focus on the papers, tried to read what they said, but the words swam and shifted and made no sense. I saw my name, or thought I did, saw lines where signatures were supposed to go, saw legal language that felt threatening even though I could not understand it. She pushed a pen into my hand, guided my shaking fingers to the bottom of the page, her voice a constant soothing stream of lies about how this was for the best, how I would be so much happier, how they would visit me all the time, how this was what I wanted, even though I had never wanted anything less in my entire life. I tried to refuse, tried to pull my hand away, but she held it firm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who pretended to be so delicate, and she guided my hand to make marks on the paper that might have been my signature, or might have been nothing. I could not tell anymore, could not hold on to what was happening long enough to understand it. And then she took the papers away, smiled at me with what might have been triumph, or might have been relief, and told me to go rest in my room, that someone would come for me in the morning, that I should pack my few belongings because I was going on a trip. That night, I lay on the cot, and I felt something shift inside me, some final piece of resistance crumbling away. I thought about my husband, tried to picture his face, and found I could not quite remember it clearly anymore. I thought about my son as a baby, tried to recall the weight of him in my arms, and found the memory distant and faded like an old photograph left too long in the sun. I thought about my life, all 63 years of it, and it felt like someone else's story, like something I had read in a book once and half forgotten. I must have fallen asleep because I woke to voices, loud and angry, coming from the front of the house. Male voices, multiple of them, one of them my son's, raised in alarm and protest. I heard heavy footsteps, heard doors opening and closing, heard Melissa's voice high and frightened asking what was going on, demanding to see a warrant, threatening to call their lawyer. I sat up on the cot, my heart pounding, confusion swirling through my foggy mind, trying to understand what was happening, why there was so much noise, why everything felt like chaos when it had been terrible but quiet for so long. The door to my room burst open, and a man stood there, a stranger in a dark suit, and behind him I could see more men and police officers, their uniforms sharp and official in the dim light of early morning. The man in the suit looked at me, and his face changed, softened with something that might have been pity or might have been anger. I could not tell. He spoke gently, asked me my name, asked if I knew where I was, asked if I was hurt. I tried to answer, but the words would not come right, came out jumbled and confused, and I saw him exchange a look with one of the police officers, saw something pass between them that I did not understand. They helped me up from the cot, gentle hands supporting me because my legs would not hold me steady. They wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and guided me out of that small room, through the kitchen where Melissa stood with tears running down her face, tears that looked real but felt fake, through the living room where my son was in handcuffs, his face red with anger and something else, maybe fear, maybe shame. I could not tell, and found I did not care anymore. They took me out through my front door, the door I had walked through so many times, the door I thought I would never leave through again, except in a coffin, and the morning air hit my face cool and fresh, and I breathed it in like it was the first real breath I had taken in months. There was an ambulance waiting, and paramedics who checked me over with practiced efficiency, shining lights in my eyes, taking my blood pressure, asking me questions I could not answer, speaking to each other in low, urgent voices about dehydration and malnutrition and possible neurological damage. They loaded me into the ambulance on a stretcher, and as we pulled away from that house, my house that had become my prison, I saw my son through the window, saw him standing in handcuffs on the lawn, saw Melissa beside him also in handcuffs, saw neighbors gathering to watch the spectacle, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, no anger, just a vast emptiness where my feelings used to be. At the hospital, they ran tests, so many tests, blood work and brain scans and physical examinations that went on for hours. Doctors came and went, speaking to each other in medical terminology I could not follow, making notes on charts, shaking their heads with expressions that ranged from anger to sadness to disbelief. A social worker sat with me, a kind woman with soft eyes who held my hand and asked me questions about what had happened, about how long I had been living like that, about whether I had family besides my son, about whether I knew that what they had done to me was elder abuse, was illegal, was criminal. I tried to answer her, but my mind was still so foggy, still so confused, memories sliding away as soon as I tried to grasp them. She was patient with me, so patient, repeating questions when I lost track of what she was asking, writing down my fragmented answers, building a picture of my nightmare from the scattered pieces I could give her. She told me I was safe now. She told me they had been investigating my son for weeks, that someone had noticed something wrong, that they had gotten a warrant, that what I had signed was not legal because I was clearly not in a mental state to consent to anything. She told me I would not have to go back there. that I would never have to see them again if I did not want to, that my house was mine, and they could not take it from me. But the question that haunted me, the question I asked over and over until she finally answered, was who had noticed, who had seen what was happening to me, who had cared enough to call someone, to report it, to save me from disappearing completely into that fog of abuse and confusion and slow erasure? The social worker hesitated, looked uncomfortable, finally told me it was complicated, that she would explain when I was stronger, when I had recovered more, when my mind was clearer. But I needed to know. I needed to understand who had thrown me a lifeline when I was drowning. So I asked again and again, until finally she sighed and told me the truth. It was Melissa, my son's wife, the woman who had tormented me, who had reduced me to a servant, who had gaslighted me and manipulated me and pushed those papers in front of me to sign away my rights. She was the one who had called the authorities. She was the one who had reported the abuse. She was the one who had saved me, and I could not understand it, could not make it make sense. Why would she abuse me for months and then suddenly save me? What possible reason could she have? The social worker told me Melissa had come forward with evidence, with documentation, with a full confession, that she was cooperating completely with the investigation, that she seemed genuinely remorseful, but it still made no sense to my confused and battered mind. Days passed in the hospital, maybe weeks, time still slippery and unreliable. The doctors worked to get my nutrition back to normal levels, to rehydrate me, to assess the damage that had been done. The neurologist who examined me spent hours testing my memory, my cognitive function, my ability to process and retain information. He asked me questions about my past, about recent events, about things that had happened yesterday and last week and last month. And slowly, painfully, my answers began to improve. The fog started to lift. The confusion started to clear. My mind, which had felt like it was breaking apart, began to knit itself back together, piece by fragile piece. And as my mind cleared, as I began to remember things more reliably, as the medications they had found in my system from my time in the ICU finally metabolized out of my body, the neurologist sat me down with a grave expression and told me something that shattered my understanding of everything all over again. I did not have Alzheimer's disease. I did not have dementia. I did not have any degenerative neurological condition at all. What I had was a severe reaction to the combination of medications I had been on in the ICU, medications that were necessary to keep me alive, but that had side effects including memory loss, confusion, and cognitive impairment. Side effects that should have been managed carefully, should have been monitored, should have been explained to me and my family. Side effects that would have resolved on their own once the medications were discontinued, and my body had time to heal. But no one had told me. No one had told my son. The hospital had discharged me with instructions about my recovery, about my medications, about what to expect, but somehow that information had never reached us. Or maybe it had reached my son, and he had chosen not to share it with me. Or maybe in the chaos of my discharge and his apparent wedding and everything that had happened, the information had simply been lost. Whatever the reason, I had spent months thinking I was losing my mind, thinking I was developing dementia, thinking I was becoming the confused and helpless elderly woman they were treating me as. And it was not true. It had never been true. My mind was fine. My mind had always been fine. It just needed time to heal. The relief I felt at this news was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion that knocked me flat. I sobbed in that hospital bed, sobbed with gratitude and grief and rage all mixed together, sobbed for the months I had lost believing I was disappearing, sobbed for the terror I had felt watching my own mind slip away, sobbed for the cruelty of a situation that had made me doubt my own sanity when there was nothing wrong with me that time and proper care would not have fixed. The neurologist sat with me while I cried, this stranger who had given me back my mind, who had told me I was not broken, just healing, just recovering, just needing time and patience and care that I had been denied. As my body and mind continued to heal, as I grew stronger and clearer and more myself again, the full picture of what had happened began to emerge. The social worker came back, and this time she brought someone with her, a lawyer from the district attorney's office who was building a case against my son. They sat with me and explained everything, and I listened with growing horror and understanding to a story that was somehow worse and also better than what I had imagined. My son had married Melissa 3 weeks before I went into the ICU. It was not a secret wedding exactly, but it was small and quick, just the two of them at City Hall. No family invited, no celebration, just a legal formality that bound them together. They had been together for 2 years before that, living together in his apartment across town, and I had liked her when I met her, thought she was good for him, thought maybe this was finally the woman who would settle him down and give me grandchildren to spoil. I had been happy for them. I had welcomed her into our family with open arms and an open heart. But 3 weeks after they married, I got sick. Suddenly, catastrophically sick. The kind of sick that lands you in the ICU fighting for your life with doctors telling your family to prepare for the worst. And my son inherited everything. As my only living relative, as my next of kin, if I died, he would get the house, my small savings account, my life insurance policy, everything I had worked for my entire life. It was not a fortune by any means, but it was enough to matter, enough to build a comfortable life on, enough to be worth wanting. The district attorney believed that my son had seen an opportunity. I was dying, or so the doctors thought, and soon he would have everything. But then I did not die. I fought back. I survived when they said I would not survive. I stabilized when they said I would not stabilize. I improved when they said improvement was unlikely. Month after month, I clung to life in that hospital bed. And month after month, my son watched his inheritance slip further away as I refused to do him the favor of dying. And somewhere in those months, the district attorney believed he and Melissa had made a plan. They would take me in when I was discharged. They would move into my house, the house that would someday be his, but was still legally mine. They would take advantage of my weakened state, my confusion from the medications, my vulnerability and dependence. They would reduce me to nothing, make me doubt my own mind, gaslight me into thinking I was incompetent and sick. And then, when I was sufficiently broken down, they would get me to sign papers, legal documents that would transfer my assets to them, that would give them power of attorney, that would essentially let them take everything while I was still alive, saving them the inconvenience of waiting for me to die. It might have worked. It probably would have worked if not for Melissa, because somewhere in the middle of executing this cruel plan, somewhere in the daily reality of what they were doing to me, Melissa had broken. The district attorney said she had come to them in tears, confessed everything, begged them to help me before it was too late, before I signed away everything, before they shipped me off to some terrible facility where I would have died alone and forgotten. She had worn a wire for them, recorded conversations with my son where he talked about the plan, where he laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me, where he calculated how much money they would have once everything was finalized. The lawyer played me some of those recordings, asked if I was strong enough to hear them, warned me they would be painful. I told him I needed to know. I needed to hear the truth from my son's own mouth. So I listened to my boy, my beautiful boy who I had loved with every fiber of my being, talk about me like I was an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved, an inconvenience in his path to wealth. I heard him laugh about my confusion, mock my memory loss, joke about how pathetic I looked shuffling around trying to please them. I heard him say things about me that no child should ever say about their parent, cruel things, hateful things, things that revealed he had never loved me at all, or if he had, that love had died long ago and left nothing but resentment and greed in its place. And I heard Melissa too, heard her voice on those recordings, and it was different from his. She participated in the cruelty, yes, but her voice lacked his enthusiasm for it. She sounded uncomfortable, hesitant, like someone going along with something they knew was wrong but did not have the strength to stop, until finally she found that strength, until finally she could not live with what they were doing anymore, until finally her conscience woke up and screamed so loud she could not ignore it anymore. The district attorney said she had broken down completely when she came to them, said she kept saying she was so sorry, that she did not know it would go this far, that she thought they would just scare me into signing the papers and then actually take care of me, that she had not understood how dark my son's heart truly was until she saw him in action. I did not know what to do with this information. I did not know how to feel about Melissa, this woman who had tormented me and then saved me, who had been complicit in my abuse but had ultimately been the reason I was rescued. Was she a villain or a hero? Was she cruel or kind? Could she be both? The lawyer told me she was facing charges too, that she would have to answer for what she had done. but that her cooperation would be taken into account, that she would likely get a much lighter sentence than my son because she had ultimately chosen to do the right thing. He asked me how I felt about that, whether I thought she deserved leniency. I told him I honestly did not know. I told him my feelings were too complicated to sort out, too tangled up in trauma and betrayal and unwilling gratitude. My son was charged with elder abuse, financial exploitation, false imprisonment, and a list of other crimes I could barely keep track of. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The recordings Melissa had made, the testimony of the police who had found me in that terrible condition, the medical reports showing malnutrition and dehydration and the effects of systematic neglect, the papers he had tried to get me to sign, papers his lawyer admitted were fraudulent and obtained under duress from someone who was clearly not mentally competent to sign legal documents. He was facing years in prison, decades potentially. His lawyer tried to make a deal, but the district attorney refused. This was too egregious, too calculated, too cruel to let slide with a slap on the wrist. I was asked if I wanted to see him, if I wanted to hear what he had to say for himself. Part of me did. Part of me wanted to look him in the eye and ask him how he could do this to me, how the child I raised could turn into this monster, what I had done wrong in raising him that had produced this capacity for cruelty. But a larger part of me, the part that was still healing, the part that needed to protect itself, said no. Said I did not need his explanations or his excuses or his apologies if he even had any to offer. Said I needed to focus on my own recovery, my own healing, my own journey back to being the person I was before all of this happened. The hospital kept me for 6 weeks total, making sure I was stable, making sure my mind was clear, making sure I could take care of myself before they discharged me. They connected me with therapists who specialized in trauma and abuse. They set me up with a nutritionist to help me regain the weight I had lost. They arranged for physical therapy to help me rebuild the strength I had lost from months of inadequate food and too much labor. They treated me like a person who mattered, like someone worthy of care and attention and respect, and I soaked it up like a desert plant finally getting rain after a drought. When I was finally well enough to leave, the social worker helped me arrange for temporary housing because I could not bear the thought of going back to that house yet, could not face walking through rooms where I had been so thoroughly broken and humiliated. She found me a small apartment, nothing fancy but clean and safe and mine, and she helped me move in with the few belongings I had, the ones they had packed for me from the maid's room, plus some new things purchased with emergency funds from a victim's assistance program. It was strange living alone after everything that had happened. Strange, but also peaceful, quiet, a chance to remember who I was without anyone telling me I was worthless or incompetent or in the way. Physical recovery was the easy part, relatively speaking. My body responded well to proper nutrition and rest. I gained back the weight I had lost. My strength returned gradually. The tremor in my hands faded away. My back stopped aching once I had a real bed to sleep on. Within a few months, I looked like myself again, like the woman I had been before the ICU, before the nightmare in my own home, healthy and whole and alive. Mental recovery was harder. The nightmares plagued me constantly, dreams where I was back in that small room, unable to escape, unable to make anyone hear me or see me or acknowledge that I existed. Dreams where I was signing papers I could not read, where my son's face was cold and hateful, where Melissa smiled her terrible smile and told me this was what I deserved. The therapy helped. Slowly, painfully, I worked through what had happened to me. I talked about my feelings of betrayal, about the complicated grief of losing my son not to death but to his own choices and cruelty. I talked about my anger, about my fear, about the shame I felt even though logically I knew I had done nothing wrong. I talked about Melissa and my confused feelings about her, about how I could hate someone and also be grateful to them, about how she had hurt me and saved me, and I did not know which truth about her was more real. My therapist helped me understand that people are complicated, that Melissa could be both the villain and the hero of my story, that her actions could be both unforgivable and ultimately redemptive, that I did not have to resolve those contradictions or come to any neat conclusions about her. Months passed. The legal case moved forward slowly, as legal cases do. My son pleaded not guilty, fought the charges, refused to take responsibility for what he had done. His lawyer painted me as a confused elderly woman who had misunderstood the situation, who had been well cared for, but in my mental state had perceived cruelty where there was only concern. It was gaslighting on a legal scale, and it enraged me. But the evidence was too strong. The recordings were too damning. The medical reports were too clear. The jury, when it finally came to trial, took less than 3 hours to convict him on all counts. I did not attend the trial. I could not bear to sit in that courtroom and hear his lawyer tear me apart. Could not bear to see my son and feel the complicated tangle of love and hate and grief that still tied me to him despite everything. But I read the transcripts later, and I was there in spirit, and I felt a grim satisfaction when I read the verdict, when I learned he would spend the next 15 years in prison for what he had done to me. 15 years. He would be an old man himself when he got out, older than I was when this all started. Maybe that was justice. Maybe that was just. I honestly did not know anymore. Melissa pleaded guilty to her charges and testified against my son. She got 3 years, with possibility of parole after 18 months if she continued to cooperate and showed genuine rehabilitation. Some people told me they thought that was too lenient, that she should have gotten more time for what she participated in. Others told me they thought it was fair, that she had ultimately done the right thing and deserved credit for that. I did not have strong feelings either way. She had hurt me. She had also saved me. Both things were true, and I had to live with that complexity. A year after everything happened, a year after I was rescued from that house, I finally went back. The court had ruled the house was mine and mine alone, that my son had no claim to it, that anything he or Melissa had brought into the house was theirs to retrieve, but the house itself and everything in it that was originally mine remained my property. I walked through that front door with my therapist beside me for support, and I felt a rush of emotions so strong it nearly knocked me down. This house, my house. The house I had built with my husband, the house where I had raised my son, the house that held 40 years of memories both beautiful and terrible. It looked the same but felt different, hollow somehow, haunted by what had happened here. I walked through each room slowly, touching familiar things. My photographs back on the mantel where they belonged, my furniture exactly as I had left it, the walls I had painted, the floors I had walked across 10,000 times. And I walked to the back of the house, to that small room that had been my sewing room and then my prison. And I stood in the doorway looking at the narrow cot, the empty dresser, the bare walls. And I made a decision. I sold the house. I could not live there anymore, could not make peace with the ghosts that lingered in every corner. I sold it and used the money to buy a smaller place across town, a cozy little cottage with a garden and big windows that let in lots of light. I filled it with new furniture, new memories, a fresh start. I joined a support group for survivors of elder abuse and found a community of people who understood what I had been through, who did not judge me or pity me, but simply accepted me and my story as valid and real. I started volunteering at a senior center, helping other elderly people navigate legal and medical systems that could be so confusing and overwhelming, using my nightmare to help prevent others from experiencing similar horrors. And slowly, day by day, month by month, I rebuilt my life. Not the life I had before, that life was gone forever, but a new life, one where I was stronger and wiser and more careful about who I trusted and who I let into my heart. I made new friends, real friends who valued me for who I was. I took up hobbies I had always wanted to try but never had time for. I traveled a little, nothing extravagant, but enough to feel free and alive and in control of my own destiny. I learned to be happy again, or at least content, at peace with myself and my past, and the strange twisted path that had brought me to this place. If you have stayed with me through this entire story, if you have listened to every painful detail of what happened to me, I want you to know something important. This story is not meant to make you sad, though sadness is a natural response to what I experienced. This story is meant to make you aware, to make you vigilant, to make you understand that elder abuse happens every single day to people just like me, people who worked hard their whole lives, who loved their families deeply, who never imagined they could be vulnerable to such cruelty. It happens in silence behind closed doors. It happens to people who are too ashamed to speak up, too confused to know they are being abused, too afraid of what will happen if they tell. If you are experiencing something like what I experienced, please know you are not alone. Please know it is not your fault. Please know there are people who will help you if you can find the courage to reach out. Call Adult Protective Services. Tell a doctor. Tell a friend. Tell anyone who will listen. Do not let them convince you that you are crazy or confused or imagining things. Trust yourself. Trust that you deserve better. Trust that there is help available if you can just hold on long enough to ask for it. And if you know someone who might be experiencing elder abuse, please pay attention. Please look for the signs: sudden changes in behavior or personality, unexplained weight loss, withdrawal from social activities, fear around certain family members, bruises or injuries they cannot explain, missing money or property. Please do not look away. Please do not assume everything is fine just because it looks fine from the outside. Please be willing to ask hard questions and make difficult phone calls if necessary. You might save someone's life. You might be the person who throws them a lifeline when they are drowning. I want to ask you to do something for me right now, something that will help build the community we are creating here. If this channel has given you stories that resonate with your heart, if these videos have made you feel less alone in your struggles, if you have found comfort in knowing that others understand what you are going through, I would be so honored if you would subscribe. Not because I need the numbers, not because I am trying to grow a business, but because when you subscribe, you are joining a family of people who refuse to be invisible, who refuse to let the world forget about us, who stand together in solidarity and say we matter. We are still here. We deserve dignity and respect and love. This channel is a safe space where your stories are valid, where your pain is acknowledged, where your voice matters. Each week I share a new story, and each story is a reminder that we are not alone, that we survive, that we are stronger than the cruelty that has been done to us. So please, if you feel moved to do so, click that subscribe button. Join our community. Let us walk this journey together. Now I need to tell you the part of the story I have been holding back, the part that changes everything you think you understand about what happened to me. Because there is one more piece to this puzzle, one more truth that I learned only recently, one more revelation that shattered and rebuilt my understanding of these events all over again. 6 months ago, 2 years after my son was convicted and sent to prison, I received a letter. It came from Melissa. She had been released on parole, had completed her sentence and her mandated therapy, had been deemed rehabilitated and released back into society. The letter was long, handwritten, pages and pages of words that I almost threw away without reading, because I was not sure I wanted to hear anything she had to say. But something made me open it, some curiosity, or maybe just a need for closure. So I read it, and in that letter, Melissa told me the truth, the whole truth, the truth I had never known, that the district attorney had never known, that had never come out in any trial or deposition or legal proceeding. She told me that yes, she and my son had planned to abuse me and steal from me. Yes, they had moved into my house with cruel intentions. Yes, everything I had experienced was real and deliberate and calculated. But she told me something else too. Something that made me see her actions in a completely different light. Melissa told me she was dying. Not might die someday like we all might die, but actively dying. Terminal cancer that the doctors said would take her within a year, maybe 2 if she was lucky, and the treatments worked better than expected. She had known about the cancer for 3 years, had known when she married my son, had known when they made their terrible plan, had known when they moved into my house and began their campaign of cruelty against me. And she had made a choice, a calculated and deliberate choice, to participate in something evil so that she could ultimately stop it from the inside. She explained it all in careful detail, and I read with growing understanding and horror. She knew my son was planning to abuse me. She had heard him talking about it before I even came home from the hospital, had heard him working out the details, the gaslighting, the isolation, the eventual signing away of my assets. She knew because he had told her, because he thought she would go along with it, because he had misread her desperation for money as desperation that would override her morals. He was wrong. But Melissa also knew that if she simply refused to participate, if she left him or reported him before anything happened, he would just find another way. He would bring me home anyway. He would abuse me anyway. He would steal from me anyway. And she would not be there to witness it, to document it, to eventually stop it. So she made the hardest choice of her life. She decided to become the villain, to play along with his plan, to participate in my abuse, all so that she could gather evidence against him, build an unimpeachable case, and ultimately save me in a way that would put him in prison where he could never hurt anyone else again. She told me about the recordings she made from the very beginning, how she wore a wire before the authorities even knew there was a case to investigate, how she documented everything meticulously, building a record that would be impossible to deny or explain away. She told me how every cruel thing she did to me was calculated to draw out my son's cruelty, to get him on record saying the worst possible things, to create evidence that would guarantee his conviction. She told me how she hated every second of it, how she cried herself to sleep every night knowing what she was putting me through, how she almost broke a dozen times and confessed everything but held on because she knew if she could just endure a little longer, she could end this permanently. And she told me why she did it. This woman who barely knew me, who had no obligation to protect me, who could have simply walked away and let whatever was going to happen happen. She did it because of her own grandmother, who had been abused by family members when Melissa was a child, abused in ways similar to what my son planned for me, and no one had stopped it. No one had saved her, and she had died alone and miserable in a state-run facility after her family had stolen everything from her. Melissa had been powerless then, too young to help, too small to make a difference, but she was not powerless anymore. She was dying, yes, but she was not dead yet, and she could use whatever time she had left to make sure my son paid for what he was planning, to make sure I did not suffer the same fate as her grandmother. The letter went on for pages, explaining details I had never known, filling in gaps in the story I thought I understood. She told me how hard it was to balance between being cruel enough to keep my son believing she was fully on board with the plan, while not being so cruel that she actually destroyed me before she could save me. She told me about the times she secretly made sure I had a little extra food when my son was not looking, about how she sometimes left the door to my room unlocked when he thought it was locked, about small acts of mercy she snuck in wherever she could without blowing her cover. She told me the hardest part was watching my mind deteriorate from the medication effects and knowing I thought it was Alzheimer's, knowing I was terrified of losing myself, and not being able to tell me the truth, because if my son suspected she was not fully committed to the plan, he would send her away and proceed without her, and I would have no one protecting me at all. She told me she went to the authorities sooner than she had planned because she could see me breaking, could see I was reaching a point where the damage might become permanent, even though it was caused by circumstances rather than disease, could see my son getting ready to finalize the paperwork and ship me away, and she knew she could not let it get that far. So she took what evidence she had, even though she had wanted to gather more, and she turned it all over and prayed it would be enough. And it was. It was more than enough. The letter ended with an apology that felt genuine and heartfelt and completely inadequate for what she had put me through, and also somehow exactly right. She did not ask for my forgiveness. She did not expect me to understand or to absolve her. She just wanted me to know the truth, to understand her choices, to know that every moment of my suffering had been witnessed by someone who cared, even if I had not known it at the time, even if that caring had looked like cruelty from where I was standing. She told me she was in hospice now, that the cancer had progressed faster than expected, that she probably had weeks rather than months left. She told me she did not expect a reply, that she would understand if I never wanted to hear from her or think about her again, but that she needed me to know, needed to die with a clear conscience, or as clear as it could be given everything she had done. I sat with that letter for days, read it over and over, tried to process this new understanding of events I thought I had already processed and moved past. And I realized something profound. My feelings about Melissa had been complicated before I got this letter, a tangled mess of hatred and gratitude and confusion. But now, with the full truth laid bare, my feelings became even more complicated in a way that was somehow also simpler. She had hurt me. That was true and undeniable. But she had hurt me in service of saving me, had become the villain so that she could ultimately be the hero, had sacrificed her own peace of mind and moral comfort to protect a stranger because she could not save her own grandmother, but she could save me. Was what she did right? I honestly do not know. Should she have found another way? Some path that did not involve participating in my abuse even strategically? Maybe. Probably. But I also know the world is messy and complicated, and sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. And Melissa made the choice she thought would protect me most effectively, even though it cost her deeply, even though it added guilt and trauma to the final months of her already tragic life. That has to count for something. That has to mean something. I wrote her back. It took me 2 weeks to figure out what to say, to find words that felt true and adequate to the complexity of what I felt. I told her I understood why she did what she did. I told her I was grateful she had saved me. I told her I forgave her for the pain she caused because I understood now that she caused it in service of a greater good, that she had been trying to protect me even when it looked like she was destroying me. I told her about her grandmother, about how her sacrifice had honored that woman's memory in a way that mattered, about how she had broken a cycle of abuse and powerlessness by choosing to act even when action required terrible things of her, and I told her I hoped she could find peace in whatever time she had left, that she could let go of the guilt and know that she had done something brave and hard and ultimately good. I mailed that letter to the hospice address she had given me, and 2 weeks later, I got a call from a hospice nurse telling me Melissa had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The nurse said Melissa had received my letter the day before she died, had read it and cried, and told the nurse she could finally let go now, that she had been holding on to make sure I knew the truth, and now that I knew, now that I had forgiven her, she could rest. The nurse said my letter had given her the peace she needed to stop fighting, to stop holding on, to finally accept what was coming. I cried when I heard that, cried for this complicated woman who had hurt me and saved me, who had played the villain to stop a greater villain, who had spent her final months carrying the weight of what she had done to me, even though she had done it for the right reasons. So here is the truth that recontextualizes everything I have told you. My son was the monster in this story. That has not changed. He is exactly who he appeared to be, cruel and greedy and willing to torture his own mother for financial gain. But Melissa was not the monster I thought she was. She was something more complex, more human, more tragic. She was a dying woman who chose to become a villain temporarily so she could ultimately be a hero, who sacrificed her own peace and comfort and moral cleanliness to save a stranger because she had not been able to save the person she loved most. She was both the worst thing that happened to me during those months and the best thing, the source of my suffering and the source of my salvation, and I have to live with that paradox. Have to hold both truths in my heart at the same time. This is what I want you to understand as we close this story. People are complicated. Situations are complicated. Sometimes the person hurting you is doing it because they are trying to save you. Sometimes the villain is actually the hero in disguise. Sometimes the world is not divided neatly into good people and bad people, but is instead filled with people making impossible choices in impossible situations, doing the best they can with what they have, trying to create good outcomes even when the path there requires walking through darkness. We want simple stories with clear villains and heroes, but life rarely gives us those. Life gives us complexity and ambiguity and situations where everyone is a little bit right and a little bit wrong, and we have to learn to sit with that discomfort. My son is in prison. That is justice. Melissa is dead. That is tragedy. I am alive and healing and building a new life. That is grace. All of these things are true at the same time, and I have learned to hold them all without needing them to resolve into some neat conclusion. This is my story. This is what happened to me. This is how I survived. And if my survival, if my willingness to share this complicated, painful, beautiful, terrible story helps even one person watching this feel less alone, helps one person recognize abuse in their own life, helps one person understand that situations are rarely as simple as they appear, then every moment of suffering was worth it. Not because suffering is good, but because connection is sacred, because truth matters, because we are all just trying to find our way through this messy, complicated world, and sometimes the best we can do is share our stories and hope they light the path for someone else. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with me through every painful twist and turn of this journey. Thank you for being part of this community where we tell our truths and hold space for complexity and refuse to be invisible. And please, if this story has touched you, if it has made you think or feel or understand something new, leave a comment sharing your own experience. You do not have to share details if you are not comfortable, but just let us know you are here, that you are listening, that you are part of this family we are building together. We need each other. We need to know we are not alone. We need to hear each other's voices echoing through the darkness, saying, yes, I am here too. Yes, I understand. Yes, we will survive this together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for being part of my healing and letting me be part of yours.